Hello students. Today we are going to discuss about the development of neck region and the structures within the neck region. So we'll go back to this basic diagram of the embryo where we can see three germ layers plus amniotic cavity and yolk sac. If you consider only the germ disc, three germ layers here you can see as ectoderm, this blue layer, then mesoderm and endoderm. Because of the development of neural tube and the notochord, the mesoderm is divided into three parts: the paraxial mesoderm, intermediate mesoderm, and the lateral plate mesoderm, which has an intraembryonic coelom also. This is the intraembryonic coelom, which is initially continuous with the extraembryonic coelom. We'll concentrate more on the paraxial mesoderm, which is actually responsible for the formation of somite, and these somites are formed from the cranial to the caudal end and are responsible for the formation of the body wall and the limbs. Now, somites in the proximal portion, which is destined to form the neck and the pharynx area, they are responsible for the development of the neck region. In approximately 4 weeks of intrauterine life, the bilaminar disc takes up a shape of a 3D structure which has a head bulge formed by the brain vesicle, that is the dilated cranial end of the neural tube, and here we have another bulge here which is called as pericardial bulge, formed due to the formation of heart and the pericardium, and here we can even see umbilical cord and limb buds. In between the head or the cephalic bulge and the pericardial bulge, there is a space which is called as stomatodium, and this represents the future mouth and the oral cavity. Later on, the area between the cephalic bulge and the pericardial bulge starts developing these thickenings. These thickenings are called as pharyngeal arches. I have a model here prepared from the clay, which the cephalic bulge and the pericardial bulge. This is the umbilical cord, and here these colorful bands which are seen here are the thickenings of the mesoderm, which are formed here and are called as pharyngeal arches. Now here, this is the first pharyngeal arch, this is the cephalic bulge, and here you can see the opening of the stomatodium, that is the future mouth and the oral cavity. Now, if you see these pharyngeal arches, they extend only in the anterior and lateral aspect. So, this model is basically representing this age group of the developing embryo, and here we can see all the thickened bands. Now, these thickened bands or the pharyngeal arches are called as pharyngeal arches because were initially called as branchial arches because it was representing it was similar to the gills of the fish, but in case of fish gills there is a communication with the anterior and exterior, but in this case we do not have such communications. That is why the term pharyngeal arches was coined for these thickenings. Now, where these thickenings are developing from, as we have earlier discussed, that these thickenings are coming from the paraxial mesoderm and they are mesodermal thickenings. But inside there is another mesenchymal tissue which is also represented, or you can say which is also contributing here, and that is the mesenchymal tissue developing from the neural crest cells. And this is for your reminder, where do you have the neural crest cells? They are the cells which develop from the ectoderm. At the junction of the neuroectoderm and the surface ectoderm, these cells also get pinched off along with the neural tube, and they lie just dorsal to the neural tube, and then they have the capability of migrating to various tissues. So similarly here also the neural crest cells, they migrate towards the pharyngeal arches where the future neck is to be formed, and they contribute to the mesenchymal tissue there. Now, if we take a section uh, approximately from this region to this region, or something like this, right? This will give us a view of inside of the pharynx on the ventral aspect. Something like this. So here we can see the ventral aspect of the whole of the pharyngeal wall in the developing embryo, and these thickenings are representing the pharyngeal arches. As I told you earlier that to begin with there were 6 pharyngeal arches, but initially only with the during formation the fifth one disappears, and we are left with the 5 pharyngeal arches, and we number them as first, second, third, fourth, and the 6th pharyngeal arch. So we can see the missing 5th pharyngeal arch. Now if we concentrate on each arch, so you will see them as bulges. The adjacent arches are formed as bulges, and in between the two there is a constricted area, or the grooved area, you can say. This grooved area is present on both sides, outer as well as inner side, because this is the floor or the ventral aspect of the pharynx. So here it will be lined inside by the endoderm, right? And on the outer aspect it will be lined by the exoderm. Now we will concentrate again on these constricted or the grooved areas. They are nothing but the continuation of the mesoderm, the thinned out mesoderm, and on which on one side is lined by the endoderm, on the other side by the ectoderm. Now these grooved areas on the endodermal side are labeled as endodermal pouches. On outer side they are called as ectodermal clefts. Now if we concentrate more on each arch, we can see here, this is the cut end of the arch. We can see that there is this greenish structure is representing the skeletal. It has a skeletal component, it has a nervous component, arterial component, and the surrounding mesoderm. Now this skeletal component has got mesenchyme, which has developed from the neural crest, while surrounding mesoderm is responsible for formation of the musculature of that particular arch. And the nerve supplies all the musculature which has developed from that particular arch, and it will migrate wherever the muscles migrate to. There is something a little more about the nerve of that of a particular arch. I told you that there is one nerve for a particular arch, but here we can see even one more nerve. So we'll just concentrate more on this groove here which is formed. This looks like a trench, so it is also called as trema. This so sometimes what happens in certain arches, apart from their own particular nerve, there is a branch of a nerve from the arch below also is supplying close to the trema. That means it lies above the trema. So it is called as pre-trematic nerve, while the nerve which is represented in the arch itself, the original nerve of the arch, is called as post-trematic nerve because it is below the trema or the trench. So there are pre-trematic nerve basically representing the branch of the nerve of the lower arch, and it is present in the arch above, and it will supply the area of the which has developed from the arch where it is now running, that is the arch above. Now we'll discuss how each arch is developing. So let's talk about the first arch first. First arch has the nerve component as the mandibular nerve, which is a branch of the trigeminal nerve. And the pre-traumatic nerve here is cauda tympani nerve, and I hope you know that it is a branch of 7th nerve, and it is represented here in this region. That is why, if you remember, full branch of the mandibular nerve is taking the fibers of cauda tympani. The muscular component here, which is developing from the surrounding mesoderm, will form the muscles of the first arch, and these muscles are all supplied by the mandibular nerve. And these muscles are all the muscles of mastication. There are four muscles of mastication: masseter, temporalis, lateral, and medial pterygoid. Apart from that, we have tensor villi palatini and tensor tympani above, and below it will be anterior belly of digastric and mylohyoid muscles, which are supplied again by the mandibular nerve. So total 8 muscles are there which are supplied by the mandibular nerve, and they all are developing from the first arch. This diagram is actually showing the development of the skeletal component. So this particular area is showing the skeletal component of the first arch, which is also, it is actually in the form of cartilage, and it is called as Meckel's cartilage. This Meckel's cartilage develops into the malleus and incus at the dorsal end, and then it is represented by the anterior ligament of malleus, which is attaching to the handle of the malleus, and from here to the spine of sphenoid. This area is representing spine of sphenoid. Then sphenomandibular ligament. Rest of the Meckel's cartilage, which was here, it merges with the surrounding mesoderm now and forms the mandible. So the mandible is not formed by the skeletal component of the first arch, but it is formed by the surrounding mesoderm, and the skeletal component, part of the skeletal component, has merged into it. Then we come to the second arch. Now the second arch, just like the first arch, also has all components, that is skeletal component, nervous component, arterial component, and the muscular component. The nerve here is the seventh nerve, that is facial nerve, and the muscular component will form all the muscles which are supplied by the facial nerve, and these include all muscles of the facial expression. Then posterior belly of digastric, stylohyoid muscle, and stapedius muscle. This yellow colored area is showing the skeletal component of the second arch. It is called as Richard's cartilage, and this leads to the development of the stapes, the third ear ossicle, then styloid process, then stylohyoid ligament, a smaller cornu of hyoid or lesser cornu we call it, and superior part of the body of the hyoid. So basically it is 5S which are developing from the second arch, which is also called as hyoid arch, and the cartilage here is the Richter's cartilage, and these 5S are stapes, styloid process, stylohyoid ligament, smaller cornu of hyoid, superior part of the body of the hyoid. This is the third arch, and the nerve here is the glossopharyngeal. So the muscle formed here, only one muscle is formed, that is stylopharyngeus, which is supplied by the glossopharyngeal. The skeletal component of the third arch completes the rest of the hyoid, that is greater cornu of the hyoid and the inferior part of the body of the hyoid. Fourth arch, the nerve of the fourth arch is superior laryngeal nerve. We will talk about fourth and sixth together. So nerve is superior laryngeal nerve here, while below nerve is recurrent laryngeal nerve, and the skeletal component of both will form the skeletal framework of the larynx. And so here we can see that upper part of the thyroid cartilage is formed by the fourth arch, while the rest of the thyroid and the cricoid cartilage and those smaller cartilages, that is arytenoid and corniculate and cuneiform cartilages, are also developed from the sixth arch. Fourth and the sixth arch lead to the development of muscles of the larynx, muscles of the palate except for tensor villi palatini, and muscles of the pharynx except for stylopharyngeus muscles. while the ventral portion of the pharynx, this portion, will lead to the formation of the tongue, which we will discuss later on. And so these are the all structures which are developing from the arches, while what develops from the endodermal pouches and the ectodermal clefts we will discuss in the next lecture. Thank you.